setting in the draft of others is important. It takes less power and energy to travel at the same speed. That is supported by data from wind tunnels, such as these couple of clips here from a specialised wind tunnel, which you can find on YouTube.
First off, Chris just drafting directly off of me. That was about a 50% reduction in drag. I started to move farther and farther forward. We got to the point where I was probably about 3 bike lengths, real bike lengths ahead of you. That difference was about a 20% drag reduction. Then even when I went behind you, so now I'm drafting off of you, I made you about 4% more aerodynamics.
But have you ever seen actual aerodynamic data from a real Criterium race? Well, that's what I'm excited to bring to you today. A lap-by-lap comparison. I'm sure someone's done it at some point in time, but this will be the first video on YouTube, to my knowledge anyway, doing such an analysis. I'm about to get geeky for a moment, but I'll keep it as short as I can and hopefully understandable. There are different methods of measuring actual drag out in the real world. One of those developed by Robert Chung. They all rely on the same physics equations. I have the power meter readings for my power meter pedals. I know the rolling resistance of my GP5000 tyres. I can look it up at bicyclesrollingresistance.com, and I've also measured it myself. I don't know my aerodynamic drag yet. That's what this is about. I know what my acceleration is. That's just the change in velocity over time, and I have that information from my bike computer. And the beauty of the Chung method is that I know what my elevation change is. The Chung method involves doing multiple laps of one loop. And of course, each time you do a lap, you end up back at the same starting point. Elevation change of 0. Using this formula, we can then calculate the aerodynamic drag as we have data for all the other parameters. You're about to see my CdA numbers, which is what defines my aerodynamic efficiency on the bike. So this is what I look like. I was on the hoods before in a comfortable position, now on the drops. On the hoods, my CdA number is about 0.39. Frontal view on the hoods and in the drops. And finally, rear view on the hoods and in the drops. I'm riding a 2009 Pinarello FP3. Fully exposed cables, with the gear cables coming directly horizontal out of the shifters. Shallow aluminium rims, so not the most aerodynamic bike. Though of course the rider is the main contributor to aerodynamic drag. Here's the data on which that CdA number is based. 11 laps in my normal race configuration. CdA in the bottom left corner there of about 0.39. There is a back and forth loop quite close to my home that I use for taking Chung measurements such as these, and this was done on a completely still night. If you're wondering what's either side of that centre section, to the left was a different trial where I did exactly the same configuration except I was dressed in normal casual clothes instead of cycling clothes. In this configuration my CdA was 0.445. Not surprisingly, significantly worse. I was wearing a cotton t-shirt, cargo shorts, and ankle socks. Otherwise, everything was kept the same. And at about this time, I was playing around with my seat position. So the section on the right is with my seat slammed back 15mm. That had the effect of stretching me out and lowering my torso slightly, reducing my CdA to about 0.38. I will note that this is before I got my Evolve Zenith bike. Well, that's too much preamble, so let's get started in the race analysis. Whilst the Nundah course looks pretty flat, there is a slight hill right in front of the clubhouse that we're coming up to now. I'm going to use the peak of that hill as my start and finish points for each lap. Doing this just makes the calculations and CdA analysis a bit easier. So the CdA number I've now thrown up on the screen is the average CdA over the whole lap. So there might be periods in a lap when it's smaller, lower periods when it's higher, but that's the average for the lap. So lap 1 has an effective CdA of 0.154. As you can see, we are riding together as a bunch. Some of the time fairly closely packed, some of the time not so closely packed, but I am sticking behind other riders. You may recall that my neutral riding position, CdA, whilst I'm riding by myself, was 0.39. So riding in this group here is causing a significant reduction in my effective CdA, a significant reduction in the effort I have to put to ride. Just punched it into a calculator and that's a 60% reduction. Commencing lap 2 now, there's a slightly higher average effective CdA of 0.16. So the way these measurements and calculations are done, it doesn't matter how much power I'm outputting, it doesn't matter if I'm pedalling or coasting, it's all taken into account by the formula. What is being calculated is the change to the aerodynamic drag, and that only. One thing I should note is that the formula cannot take into account braking. So that is one reason why I've selected this race from November 25. It's because it was a pretty smooth race and I went the whole race without braking. So until someone puts torque meters on brake rotors to measure the amount of energy and torque being lost by braking, chung analysis is limited to circuits or events when you don't brake at all. The CD part of a CdA refers to how slippery a shape is. So like a teardrop will have a very low number, a flat plate moving through air will have a very high number. And the A in CdA refers to area or cross-sectional area. So generally speaking, it's harder for a large person to have a lower CdA. So for reference, I'm about 1.81 meters tall. We've moved into lap 3 and my average effective CdA has increased to 0.197. That's the average over the whole lap. As you can see, I'm hitting wind right now. Strung out and I've left a gap to the guy in front of me. And when I haven't left a gap for some reason, I'm off to the side. We've just started lap 4 and my effective CdA average over this lap is 0.204, so it's worse again. And looking at the video right now you can see why. I'm just sort of leaving myself exposed to the wind, struggling to stay with them. CdA is quite variable in this lap, quite bad now, but it does come back together again, so where it improves. start of lap 5, and I do a vastly better job of staying in the draft and being more aerodynamic this lap. Yeah, that's not hard to do when everyone's in a big bunch. Average CdA over this lap is 0.139. This is the lowest figure for the whole race. So yeah, I sat in the draft and I had the lowest aerodynamic drag in this particular lap that you're watching now. Probably worth noting that the view from the camera is very wide angle, and the people around me in the bunch is probably a lot closer together than it visually appears on the screen. In person it seems a lot closer and tighter. Commencing lap 6 now. My average effective CdA for the lap is 0.157. I've taken advantage of the slower pace to move up a bit in the group. There's a big jump in my effective CdA for lap 7, up to 0.198. That might not seem like a lot just looking at the number, but that is a 26% increase. So that means I'm having to put out an extra 26% wattage compared to what I did last lap. So if I'm riding at a speed that requires 200 watts of power, and my effective CdA goes up by 26%, I then require 252 watts to ride at that same speed at the worst CdA figure. It's probably years of training on the bike to achieve such a jump by an increase in fitness. Starting lap 8, it's an effective CdA of 0.144. And of course, as always, that's the average over the overall lap. As you can see, it bunches up and gets a bit tighter again. Starting lap 9, it's an effective CdA of 0.188. The peloton's quite strung out, so whilst I'm sitting behind one rider, there's not a lot of bodies in front of me, so I'm copping a lot of wind. You get a much better draft when there's a whole bunch of riders right in front of you. Commencing lap 10, effective CdA of 0.179. Looks like I spend most of it sitting off to the side in the wind, when I could have been sitting behind people, like I briefly am now. some improvement in lap 13 to an effective CdA of 0.160. Interesting that I've left a bit of a gap there, but at least I'm mostly sitting behind the rider rather than off to the side. Although, not right now. I guess riders aren't particularly wide, so it makes sense that you want to be sitting right behind them rather than offset a bit in order to get the maximum draft. There is a natural tendency to be able to want to see where you're going though. And it also helps with the speed fluctuations when you're off to the side a bit. Don't have to worry too much about getting too close and braking, etc. You can kind of move backwards and forwards in relation to them. I guess what you're doing when you do that is using the air to brake you, which is not what you want. Better to ride more smoothly. A slight worsening in lap 12 to effective CdA of 0.176. This is a tough lap, we're really hammering. Going into lap 13 and looking at that gap that I'm letting open up in front of me, you won't be surprised to see my CdA has worsened a little bit to 0.196. I just need to ride behind people for crying out loud. There we go. Though sometimes you don't have a lot of choice. Pretty similar heading into lap 14, 0.199. I've got my hands on the hoods like this. My body is down quite low, my forearms are horizontal, so a fair bit more aero than up in the normal top of hoods position. As you can see, these laps are getting pretty messy. Drafting behind others some of the time, hitting wind, trying to bridge across other times. But yeah, that effective CdA of 0.99 is 0.199 is the average for the whole lap. Heading into lap 15, effective CdA 0.181. Commencing lap 16, one of the worst of the race. Effective CdA 0.204, and you can see why. And yeah, ignore the guy who's complaining about you dropping wheels, etc., because it's not just you that's doing it. I'm starting to really struggle in this race, so still kind of hanging on, and that may not last for much longer. Lap 17, a small improvement to 0.194, still not great numbers though. I am literally right at the very back of the race now. Lap 18 is where things start to really go pear-shaped. Effective CdA is 0.258. As you can see, I'm in the process of being dropped. I do kind of hang on a little bit, probably getting a little bit of draft here. I'm probably also a bit low in Aero, so that's why the figure's not as bad as by myself riding on top of my hood's position. Heading into lap 19 by myself. Lap 19 and 20 are basically the same. Effective CdA of 0.363. Probably not too fun just watching me struggle along by myself, so we might fast forward a little bit. Heading into lap 21, I'm still by myself, but my effective CdA for the lap average does improve to 0.324 as I am caught towards the end of the lap. And I do tag back on to the end of the bunch.
Oh yeah. Keep going.
Heading into lap 22 at the back of the bunch with an effective CdA of 0.159. So being a lapped rider, I'm now out of contention for the race, and I'm kind of required not to interrupt or influence the race, so I'm sitting at the back in order to do that. With me there is, on the right, is Neve Parslow. She's also not part of this race. She normally races a higher level than this, but just jumped on the back for a bit of fun, a bit of training, I guess, I presume. It was only a few months after this, but Neve became the under-19 Australian champion in the road race and also the time trial.
Practicing C grade for the night series, are you?
No, just training off the B grade.
I think ladies go down a grade during that series.
I'm not going to.
Okay. Need the training, eh?
So we're on lap 23 now, effective CdA 0.153, just a tiny improvement on last lap. At least I'm doing a pretty good job of sitting behind the rider in front of me now. Starting lap 24, pretty all the same CdA. I think there's 2 more laps to go after this one is completed. That's the 2 lap to go sign. Lap 25, a very small increase, back up to 0.157. That's the bell. Final lap. I'm kind of off the back again for the final lap. My CdA goes up to 0.201. This shows the average for the overall race, 0.189. The blue line is the Chung virtual elevation graph, the green line the actual elevation as recorded by my bike computer. You can see the first half is trending down, which means that the CdA was better than the average CdA. Next little bit is horizontal, meaning it reflected my actual CdA reasonably well. Followed by the steep climb when I was by myself and I had my CdA much higher than the average CdA. Followed by the decline at the end, where again my CdA was better than the average overall race CdA. From this graph there is no clear relationship between the average lap speed and CdA. The points on the right are when I was riding by myself, and obviously I was slower then, but it doesn't appear to be a correlation between them as such. I had thought at higher speeds the CdA might have increased slightly simply due to the peloton stretching out and therefore getting less draft from other riders, but otherwise I would have expected them to be entirely independent. Here we're looking at 4 screen captures from 4 different laps. On the left are 2 laps with very low CdA coefficients, and on the right are two laps with higher CdA coefficients. The differences between those numbers is very significant and could have a huge impact on the outcome of the race and your freshness for the final sprint. This chart shows the effective CdA for each and every lap, just in case you're interested in going back and reviewing one. Finally, my biggest takeaway from analysing this video and doing this work was the importance of riding behind the rider as opposed to offset and to the side of the rider. I know that sounds obvious, but it's not quite so obvious when you're out there on the bike and you want to be able to see where you're going. This situation also happens when there's a nice tight pace line, which you aren't in, although you'd like to be, where you kind of get locked out onto the side. But the difference is huge. It's the difference between getting a good draft and getting a very poor draft. Well, I hope that was beneficial and useful. I need to do a similar analysis with my new Evolve SEMA. As for my race...
Yeah, it's feeling good until I wasn't.